What's up? Silas here. I'm here with Steven. If you can say hi to everyone.
Hello, everyone.
We're here with the continuation of our conversation series. In this actual topic, we're talking about Cracks in the Ivory Tower, the moral mess of higher education, which is about Jason Brennan and Phillip Magness. By Jason Brennan, that's about. It's about education and things like that.
Yeah.
And this is part of different conversations I've been having with Steven, and I want to expand this to encourage other people to have conversations about certain topics. And we've had several ones about different topics, starting with You Are What You Consume, which is about the food we eat and the history, how do menus come to be, how do restaurants work, what's the actual culture and things that go around this, how do you develop certain cultural foods. And from that, I had in mind that human beings are more than our physical selves. So it's not just simply the protein, the fats, and the carbohydrates that make your actual body, skin, bones, hair, and everything. But we also are minds. So you are what you consume. The ideas you consume, the things you appropriate, and things like that make us who we are. And that's what I've had in mind with this series. And Stephen has been graceful enough to join me in many of these conversations and tell us a bit about this topic and why we're talking about this book in specific.
Sure. So this book explores various ethical issues in higher education. As I've said a few times now, it's not about the ideology that's taught, although we could probably do a whole series on that. We sort of did with the last series, Cynical Theories. But this book is more exploring various ethical concerns as far as how academia is funded, the curricula that's required, the cheating that goes on, the teachers not caring, grading doesn't measure what it's supposed to, et cetera, et cetera. Each chapter sort of covers one of these topics. We break it down with the authors break it down very nicely with things they've observed, but also a number of empirical studies, which give some very compelling information.
Yeah. So we're going to break it down. We've been breaking it down to the different chapters of the book. And if you haven't watched or listened to any other ones in this series, in the other series, we don't really suggest any kind of listening order. But with the previous one, as Stephen mentioned, with the Cynical Theories book about critical theory, we did one video talking about postmodernism and defining that. And that kind of informed when we mentioned the word postmodernism or some of the definitions or lens to actually think about both what the authors used and how we're actually treating the material. And in this one, we've recorded one part about the 7 big economic insights, and then normative business ethics questions and descriptive business ethics questions. And that is something that Stephen pulled out from the book, and it's what the authors are using to actually break down the content, and that's also what we are talking about. So that is a suggestion that at least before this, or at least after this, before you get to the rest of the series, that would be a helpful one to listen to and kind of inform you of how we're approaching this content, because problems occur not because of what X is, but because of how we define X. So we might be talking about certain things in a certain way, and you might be approaching it in a different way, and that could be leading to some problems in the communication that we're having together.
Sure.
So yeah. Now, here's the table of contents, and we are on chapter 7 today, and this is the contents. Number 1 is neither gremlins nor poltergeists. Number 2, what the academics really want. Number 3, why most academic advertising is immoral bullshit. Number 4, on reading, on trails, and student evaluations. Number 5, grades, communication breakdown. Number 6, when moral language is a cover for self-interest. Number 7, the general education hustle. Number 8, why universities produce too many PhDs. Number 9, cheaters everywhere. Number 10, 3 big myths about what's plaguing higher education. And number 11, answering the taxpayers, which is how I'm looking forward to do it, because we know we have a short talk before this, and I just checked to see what percentage of the student loan debt in the United States of America, the 1.5 trillion about student loan debt, is held by the public sector versus the private. And I just question out there for everybody out there, if you know that off head, I'm going to say it right now, but I was surprised. It's only 7.87% is actual private sector, and everything is private, and everything else is public. So that's by the government, and that's wow. That's a major amount. Yeah. And after we record that 11th part, we'll do one more part where we're kind of winding down and thinking about certain things. So yeah, any other thoughts before we get to chapter 7 here?
Nope, that's pretty much it. I think, again, as I said, as you listen chapter by chapter, you'll see it's the cumulative effect of all these various issues, and this is why academia is such a mess. It's not one or two things; it's all these little things adding up.
Okay, I'm still just taking back a bit with that 7.8%, and this is something where, and I think that the positive thing with this thing of going into this book and having these conversations is some of these things, especially in the last one we read in particular, there was something we were talking about with the adjunctive, and was it adjunctivitis or something?
Adjunctification. Yeah.
Adjunctivitis is probably something you have with like your teeth or something. There was adjunctification, and there was also something about the tenure track and things like that. This information, this is something that most of us, if you're listening to this, chances are you've been through some level of schooling. It might not be higher education specifically in the United States of America and one of the 9,500 schools that this book focused on, but you've been in some sort of educational system that has taken some inspiration or used some of the systems that are being discussed here. So we have some familiarity, lived experience from it. And I think there's still going to be actual details about the actual content that's been done in such a great way by Jason Brennan and Phillip Magness here. And Stephen did a good job of pulling out some important parts and things like that that are just going to be, I think, informative to people unless you've actually been in the system. And maybe even some of the people in the system might learn about other parts of the system. Like, I don't think your average teacher would know, your average college, university professor understands that it's only 7.8% of the students who are being, 7.8%. The government is just paying for people. They're literally farming children.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Now, chapter 7, the general education hustle. It literally is a hustle. These are hustlers, like on the corner, just selling drugs. Hey, kids, you want some drugs? You want some books? You want some degrees? What is going on here? Tell us what's going on with the general education.
I think you're gonna have fun doing. You're gonna have fun doing the cover for this too. You're gonna probably have a drug dealer selling Gen Ed.
Somebody slanging degrees in dark alleys.
So we open up here with a quote from Adam Smith in 1774. This is actually a good quote. I hadn't heard it before. He said, "Monopolists very seldom make good work, and a lecture which a certain number of students must attend, whether they profit by it or no, is certainly not likely to be a very good one." He said this in 1774. So even the idea of compulsory classes back then was still a thing. So why do universities require general education classes? Well, these are the same talking points we heard in the chapter about liberal arts and philosophy. It'll make you a better thinker. It'll make you well-rounded. It'll help you to become a leader of tomorrow, blah, blah, blah. So, but our authors here will argue it's more for the university's sake. And as usual, they'll dress this up in moral language to try and disguise their motives. So the other example they open up here is there's sort of this joke about how doctors have horrible handwriting. So they've actually done, and they've done studies on this. They've said that empirically, a lot of doctors have bad handwriting. So let's say medical school, to deal with this, they start requiring handwriting classes. They still get complaints about handwriting. Okay, they require a second tier of handwriting classes. They still get complaints. They require a third tier of handwriting classes. Still no results. They say, hey, wait a minute, maybe we need to rethink this. Maybe we need to undo some of this and set up a new program. It's not working. But now you have an entrenched faculty that is trained solely in handwriting instruction and is fighting to keep their status. Well, welcome to the world of academic rent seeking. And they explain that apparently in the 19th century, penmanship classes were actually required because you figure no computers, no typewriters yet, so you had to be a good writer. But of course, as those things became invented, my handwriting's terrible personally, by the way. You don't need it because you just type things out. I mean, students even type their notes now. So it's like, why spend time, money, energy learning how to be a better writer if it's unnecessary? And medical schools, to be clear, again, this is a fictional example, so medical schools aren't doing this, but a lot of undergraduate schools are, which we'll get into in the next section. So any thoughts or comments so far?
Yeah, with that one in the 1774 compulsory schooling, why is that a thing? Why should it be compulsory? What is the argumentation? I know people have different argumentations, but you personally, as a person, why do you think K through 12? Make a case. If somebody just asked you and was like, okay, make a case why K through 12 should be compulsory. If somebody was just brand new to your culture, to your society, why should they have to go through that particular schooling system just because they happen to live in that given area. I don't think somebody can really make a case for that. And I don't even think it's still there, although some people are for universal higher education or free higher education, as they call it, which is not really free, but I guess it is. It's not there, but it's not here, but it's there. So it's out there. It's taxed. They're talking about taxpayer funded, and as I mentioned, it's already taxpayer funded. 7.87% is private sector loans, so you already have a taxpayer funded thing. So when they talk about that, they're still not. You don't really hear people saying, when it comes to that free college, we need to get a same system like K through 12, where you don't get to pick your college. You just go to whichever college happens to be in the area you live in. So people already understand that there is something wrong with that compulsory nature. And then if they understand that, how come they don't take it further to, once you get to the college, how come they still carry over that whole thing where there's some courses that you have to take, you have to have the attendance. And I know some universities don't really do attendance anymore. It's just about, oh, can you actually do the actual information? And I think that's a better kind of situation to think about. So that's just a question for people out there. I don't know if you have. I don't think you're an advocate for compulsion in this situation. So there's no need to try. Also, the handwriting thing. Yeah, my handwriting is horrible. Like, I don't know if you can see. I don't even like show it on the camera.
Oh yeah, I see.
So,
Yeah.
Yeah, where literally I'll be writing one word, and the first time I write the letter, the next time I write it, it'll be different. Like in the same word. It doesn't even change. It doesn't have to go paragraph to paragraph. Like with the A, sometimes I'll do it like the A in the email thing, on the app thing. And then the next time I write it, it will be with that kind of thing, like where it's like a D, but the top is broken down. So that will change like in the word. So I don't know. But is that important? And that's the thing with the doctors. Why should they learn how to write? It's not something that's useful to be a doctor, and yet you have that kind of general education type of thing where they say there's certain courses, once you get into typical undergrad, that you have to take English 101, you have to take mathematics 101, you have to take sociology, this and this. And then now we've talked about in the critical theory talk, where now they're trying to insert these other courses as general studies courses. You have to take intersectionality. You have to take queer theory, or they're going to say you have to do things like that. And even further, they're trying to insert that into the 300 level courses, into the 400 level courses, where you're supposed to be doing intensive into the actual degree that you're trying to study. And those are the things that are starting to become very dicey in this situation.
Sure. We'll get more into this as the discussion goes on, but like one of the things I keep bringing up is how much do people actually learn in these situations? And like you'll see there's some issues with this. Like, I mean, do you know anyone who has said like my general education course has made me who I am today? It's no, this is fluff that I have. This is fluff that I have to take to get to something else. Number one, and then the other thing is, how much time do we already spend in schools? We always hear this about we need free college, all this. I mean, the government already has you K through 12, maybe preschool, if you get held back even longer. So it's like all that over a decade plus in school, and what skills, what knowledge do you have in reality? And that's where people like the Praxis guys have been critical. I don't know if you saw Isaac Morehouse actually put out a new course today about job hunting. I'm thinking about doing it. It's like $100, but it gets into about creating value and like finding ways to signal to employers that you're more valuable in order to seek employment, so not relying on your resume, for example. And but one of the things they always talk about is also, again, I'm not saying nobody should go to college, but it's like, remember, college is 4 or more years of your life. If you study a lot of stuff that you don't want or never use, that's 4 years you could have spent gaining skills in the workplace, making money, doing it. Like there is the opportunity cost there. And it's like, I think about in restaurants, I mean, there are people who became sous chefs in 5 years or something. So it's like, maybe in other fields, it's a similar thing. Like 4 or 5 years, that's something time you could be spent working your way up the ladder, and then you could end up much better off long run. And plus you'd have practical skills, and you can start making less money because you don't need to pay off debt. So it's a lower risk for them. So there's other plus sides to that as well. You know?
Yeah. So this is a true thing. And I guess with the general studies, as we've mentioned in, I think, part 2 in chapter 2, we've mentioned this earlier, where there's extra things where people might say about the university, oh, the thing I got from it, maybe I met my wife in the English 101 course I had to take. So that one, yes, I get it. And as we've mentioned, the environment of saying being around people of a similar age with some shared likes and wants has positives. So we're just thinking you can still have that environment where you're getting your first taste of being independent, being living outside of your home, or doing these different things, meeting new people. Those are still things that you can do without the current education system, without the general education hustle that goes on. There's still ways to do that. And even these people that you said who just go get a job, you still get that. Even if you
Yeah.
move to a city and you apprentice at a place or you study at a vocational school that is
Yeah.
directly into it, you still get a similar type of experience because chances are there will be people at a certain age, and even in more particular, you might be going directly into something that you are much more interested in.
Yeah.
And if you're in a situation where there's the highest amount of choice, chances are you'll be around other people that also chose to be there. So even the affinity of the people you meet is going to be much higher versus just being put in places and, oh, someone's just there because they had to pick something. Just getting into a situation where somebody picked this because they wanted to do it, they were capable of doing it, they wanted to get better at it. In that kind of situation, you might find a wife that's even better. You might find a husband that's
Yeah.
a lot more, that values you a lot more because you already value the things they value versus trying to see certain things in the people that you thought might have been there. Oh, this person came to a Shakespeare course. They must like Shakespeare. No, they don't really like Shakespeare. They just need an English. They need a language course. But you just build up all these other things on them versus somebody who's like, I chose this because I love Shakespeare, and then you get together and all these kinds of things. So yeah, that's just
Well,
something in
the
mind
other
with
thing
it.
too is I had sort of a similar conversation with somebody I know recently where he was like, "Oh, well, college was valuable to this person that we know. They didn't use their degree, but it was valuable." And I'm like, "Well, how is it valuable? Like, one, it's like if you're not using the material, and two, the people in question, they went to college decades ago, so college was a lot cheaper. So yeah, it's like proportionate, even with inflation factored in, it was a much smaller percentage of your income. So yeah, maybe
Yeah.
if you learn some things that you sort of use, yeah, maybe it's worth it. But if you're going 60,000, 100,000, 200,000, whatever in debt, it's like, was it worth all that money and time? And again, what is the measurement for it was worth it? If you admit, oh, I don't use a degree, it's like your example of, oh, what is it, 80 something percent of people said it was worth it, then it's like, but 10% or something use their degrees. It's like, well, what are they basing that off of? Oh, I had a fun time. Okay, great, but was it worth spending all that money? It's like this just keeps raising more questions than it answers.
Yeah.
And also in the case of apprenticeship too, I remember one of the things I like about that is like, even if you don't do that thing directly, you're still gaining work experience. If you do a good job, you'll still gain references, things like that. Like one of my friends I used to work with, actually, when he was in high school, he did an internship at a mortician, and he said like, he's not doing that, but it was like he had fun exploring it, and they gave him a reference. So it's like that can build onto something else. They can say, oh, he doesn't want to do this, but he did a good job. I'd recommend him elsewhere. That opens up doors somewhere else. And you still learn about showing up on time. You still learn to follow orders. You still learn time management, like other things do. You do learn other skills in the process too. Yeah. And if it's
And
paid, some internships are paid, usually not, but some aren't. It's like you might make some money too. So there you
yeah,
go.
but as you mentioned, all those other things are other ways of
Yeah.
profiting that are arguably more profitable than
Yeah.
sitting in a place and getting a degree, or not a degree. What's the thing? A credit? Yeah, getting just a credit is might not be as profitable. You might be This is the same way how some people might say, "Oh, being in this place made me meet this one person." Sometimes going to that place might make you be distracted by that different person. Excuse the problem with the connections again. So I was just saying that when you go to an actual location, yeah, you can meet somebody, but also by being at that location, if you were somewhere else at that time, you could be maybe infatuated with this one person because you just happened to be there. When if you were actually following your own desires in a more voluntary way, you'd be in another location, meeting somebody who's also there for those similar reasons, and make a stronger connection with that person than you do with these people who you're in this general education class for arbitrary reasons.
All right, so
Yeah.
let's move on here. What is rent seeking? We sort of talked about it in previous chapters, but it's essentially using the political process to guarantee income or some other benefits. So the examples from the previous chapters, we talked about Archer Daniels Midland, the farming conglomerate that gets subsidies for ethanol, corn syrup, things like that. Costco pushing for the higher minimum wage to bankrupt competitors, the students who push for the rock climbing wall that only a few benefit from, but everyone pays for, Coca-Cola requiring chemists for water purity, even though there's no need for it and it would bankrupt their small competitors, things like that. Those are examples of rent seeking. So next section, a tale of two disciplines. So academics get PhDs, generally want to work in their given field, but sometimes there isn't enough demand for them. So they deal with this by lobbying administration to get students to have to take their classes. So as you can imagine, the disciplines with the lowest demand and weakest opportunities for outside funding will be the ones pushing hardest to get their material taught. So look at any university's general education requirements and you'll see this. So academics often complain about poor job prospects. There are way more people seeking employment as college professors than there are jobs to employ them. And to be clear, this does vary from field to field. For example, economics PhDs, about 90% of them are able to find employment within the first year of work. And then over half of them secure jobs within academia. Wait, sorry, what was this here? 90% are able to find full-time work within a year of graduating, and then at least half of them get jobs within academia. So even within academia, which is considered a saturated market, they can still find jobs. And they found that unemployment among economists with PhDs is actually less than 1% a year. So if you study economics, there's a lot of demand for that because think about it, it's like you can teach economics, you can work for a financial institution, you can work for the government, you can work for various businesses that want to make predictions, all of that. So the humanities and English, however, have far worse prospects. The job market for English PhDs is far worse, and English suffers from adjunctification as well. We talked about that in the last chapter. A 2012 survey says that 16.4% of the adjunct workforce teaches an English or literature department, and then 5.3% teaches in one of the modern languages department. So contrast this, you figure over 21% either teaches English or other languages, and then in the contrast this with economics, where only 0.7% work as adjuncts, and they usually teach things like economics 101 or something like that. Usually macro and micro 101, I think that's what it is. So also bear in mind here too that English and the humanities each year, they also maintain a certain carryover from the previous year. That is, professors who are working as adjuncts because they want to move up to something higher, but the higher jobs aren't there. So they're getting new professors plus the people who were there already who are trying to move up as well. So in short, the problem is that there are more PhDs in the job market and academia can absorb. This is going to be explored in the next chapter. That's what the next chapter focuses on. So remember here too that when we compare economics to English, we also have to consider that economics has more opportunities outside of the university system. Again, it's like you can work for different businesses, government, all that. In 2015, only 13% of English PhDs worked outside of a university. So you figure maybe some in elementary school. Yeah. Some in elementary school, maybe some could eventually become administrators, but it's like there's not a huge demand for PhDs in English, as you can imagine. That was the joke with the Harvard guy I told you about. His degrees were in his undergrad at Harvard was Russian history and literature, and his PhD, I think, was like political science and Soviet diplomacy. It's like, well, Russian history and literature, you can teach it and that's it. And then Soviet diplomacy, well, the Soviet Union's not around anymore. So it's like, you know, it's one of those things like his family was rich, so he was able to take that because he found it interesting. But it begs the question, if you don't have money, especially with how expensive academia is now, would something like that really be worth it just as a hobby? I'm not sure it would be.
So that's what I was thinking. How many English majors also just don't work? Because they talked about only 13% that work outside. But so here I was thinking about the sort of employment that certain people have. If you're a nuclear scientist and you're going to work in the nuclear power station. There's going to be limited places. But maybe if you're in an English major, there's many other places and ways you can work. Unemployed in the general market versus just being self-employed, or would self-employed count as employed?
Yeah, I would say so. Because I mean, think about
when they do these employment figures, do they count like if you have an Etsy store or something? I don't know if you have some kind of home business, like would they consider that to be employed?
Well, because think like someone like James Lindsay, his undergrad, I think. Trying to remember, I always mix it up. One of his degrees is in math, the other is in physics, but he hasn't been in academia in a while. I guess like he runs a business with his wife, so it's like he's still employed, but he's not employed in that field. So I'd imagine
a freelance writer.
There's probably more people like that. Like, oh, I run a business with this person, or like in the case of my mother, she studied political science and history, but she did different things. Like she got a job in a bank via my grandfather. She stayed at home for a bit. She went to banking and then real estate, and then she worked in a home with she works in a home with adults with mental disabilities. But again, she got that job through people she knew. So it's like there's probably more situations like that too. You know?
Yeah. And of course, there's a difference between getting the PhD and getting your undergrad.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, sure. So this is interesting here, though, is that one surprising bit of information is that the demand for academic employment with English majors is actually expanding even faster than economics. English is actually one of the largest departments on campus. Far more people are employed in the English departments than elsewhere. There's a chart in the book. Maybe we can post that or something. I can send it to you if you'd like, which shows the staffing by department. And then what's interesting here too is the popularity of economics as a major has increased over the past 20 years. They said English, on the other hand, has remained stagnant most of the 2000s and has actually declined since 2012. So the number of jobs in English has grown fast at a faster rate than economics, but not fast enough to accommodate all these PhDs. So it's there are still more PhDs than we need in English, but the market in English is still expanding. There's still people getting PhDs in English, but there aren't enough jobs to accommodate the people who still are studying English, if you want to look at it that way.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a strange thing. Like the example they make is, let's compare Apple to Samsung. Let's say that the iPhones and the Galaxies have the same labor inputs. Let's say demand for iPhones increases 40%, demand for Galaxies increases 20%. But yet Samsung were to hire way more people. You would see what's wrong with that immediately. It's like, well, you need the same labor, but why are you hiring way more people? And the key to understanding this is that academic institutions don't operate the same way for-profit businesses do. They're not funded the same way, and they don't have to sell their product to people. You figure these companies, they have to start with capital on hand. They have to convince people to buy their product. And then if demand picks up, they hire more people to accommodate. But with this, you have all these PhDs that are underemployed. So they push to have their classes taught, and then those get forced onto students. So it's a whole different dynamic as far as, yeah, exactly. And here's what's interesting too. He said, they say, I should say, suppose universities decide to reduce their English departments to be on par with the faculty to degree ratio that other core social sciences have. So the way it works, for example, is in political science, a lot of the social sciences, it's the faculty to degrees, it's 1 to 2. So you figure for every professor, there's 2 people graduating with degrees. With English, it's actually the reverse. For English, it's 75,350 faculty to teach for a little over 44,000 degrees. So there's way more people teaching English than there are people graduating. And
wait, how's that working again? Okay, so
in the case
people teaching English, and not all these teachers are, because before we were talking about the PhDs. Yeah. So the PhDs go back into teaching.
Yeah.
And doesn't necessarily mean they're all teaching English.
Yeah.
And this number you mentioned there is any English course. It's not just PhD level, right?
Yeah, it's just English in general.
Okay.
But then what they're saying here is that if they were to slash the English professorship to get to a point where it's on par with political science or sociology or something, this would mean universities would have to fire about 53,000 English professors. So and the authors are saying, they're like, let's be clear, we're not telling universities go out and fire all these people, but it does raise the question of why are there so many people? Why are there more people holding degrees teaching fewer people when the demand for that isn't even there? And then they point out here too that economics, there's the faculty to degrees, it's 0.42 to 1. So basically it's just over 2 degrees for every faculty member teaching. And then what's interesting here is that business schools actually have a 0.23 ratio. So you figure it's about 1 faculty member for every 4 business graduates. And business itself, again, it gets a little more complicated because business is not a homogenous thing. I mean, you have finance, accounting, business ethics, business administration, management. So it does include a lot of things, but think about how far fewer faculty there are teaching these degree holders versus English, it's the reverse. It's you have way more people teaching and fewer people graduating, which kind of,
Okay.
yeah. And
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I just
go ahead.
in mind that means they still teach more students, but we're talking specifically the people who are majoring in English who will eventually graduate with the English undergrad. But that's because the physics major will still have to take an English course.
Yeah.
The engineering major will still have to take it. The
Right.
feminism major will still have to take an English course.
Yeah.
Yet the teacher who's teaching physics or feminism or those things, majority of the people who take their courses will be majors in that, so that the figure is going to go closer in that kind of sense. So
Yeah.
the other ones might have fewer students, but it's more specialized. They're teaching more specific. Yeah, these people are general. Okay.
But I think what's interesting with business, how the ratio is a lot higher. Again, it's about, if you include all those business related professors, it's about one professor for every 4 degree holders, because the ratio is 0.23. So that means that for every professor you see in all those classes that I mentioned, there's like 4 people with degrees coming out. But with English, again, it's the reverse. So, and then on top of it, add that a lot of these English people, the PhDs, they act like they're under attack, their funding is being cut, all this. But they said apparently their departments are expanding at a 10% faster rate than academia as a whole. So this is the usual thing you see with academics. Oh, our funding's being cut. We're being cut. Oh, we don't have enough funding. And then you look at the reality. It's no, money is pouring into this. Yeah.
Well, they are English majors. They know how to use language to persuade people to do certain things, maybe.
Yeah. I'm going to get into the next section. Do you have any more comments before we move on, or?
Right here is a lead-in about me getting into the choices people make to choose certain majors in certain locations. You should have some idea of how useful they would be. By the students not choosing to major in it means they haven't chosen it to be that valuable. Because again, as you mentioned, we're talking about the United States of America, 9,500 like 500 schools, and people might say it's American or American English and not the King's English, but in general, most people speak English. It should be something that by college, after K through 12, people should be. You should be proficient enough in the language to be an adult. You don't really need extra 101 in college, I think. But you'd think, actually, because if you look at the actual drop in the amount of money per student has gone up in the United States of America, yet the actual if they check the efficiency scores, how good some people are at math, how good they are at like reading, that's going lower. So maybe that's part of it. Yeah.
Well, we'll get into this in the next section, but we talked about it in the previous chapter too, where students are taking more and more classes, but there's no measurable improvement in skills, and it's like, well, where's this money going? How's it being used? And it just raises a lot of questions, because again, it's like, oh, we're charging more and more for university, but then it's like you're getting less out of it. It's, well, people, if you're going to college or know people who are going, I think that you should at least be skeptical of this.
Okay.
All right. So the next section, it's called the Gen Ed's job program. So most college students are bad writers. Many first-year students arrive at college lacking grammar, syntax, and even a poor understanding of paragraphs and structure. When Jason was a teaching assistant at the University of Arizona, he said that half the papers he graded didn't even qualify as argumentative essays. Phil experienced similar issues even when he was assigning a short research paper for an upper-level course. And, of course, bear in mind that in Phil's example, he's teaching students who had already been in college a few years. So that's not very good. This problem also spills into the workforce. We talked a bit about this in Chapter 3. A 2015 survey prepared for the American Association of Colleges and Universities asked graduating students to self-assess their own workplace skills. About 65% of them rated themselves as excellent, but only 27% of employers agreed with their ratings. So not only do students not learn as much as they're said to, but they also severely overestimate their own skills. Because again, it's like, what do they say versus what do employers say? And again, you see this at culinary school too. People come out, they think they know everything. Employers are like, what did you learn in school? Like, did you pay attention? So there's a lot of that too.
Getting back into it, I might cancel this out, I might cut this out, but if not, just having some connection problems. Been having those for a while here as we've been recording these. But as I was saying, I think I was talking about how problems occur not because of what X is, because of how we define X. and we've just been talking about how people should speak English, but we've clearly seen that there's some struggles when it comes to the college level thing. And I was also mentioning that from my background as an artist, being able to draw, there's sometimes when someone will look at something I've done and be like, oh, that's great. That's an amazing piece. But what I had in my mind was more dynamic, more expressive, and was moving around, had all these different colors. So I had certain limitations in what I was able to actually put down just from my ability alone. Even if I had the best tools ever, even if you gave me all the tools Leonardo da Vinci had, I would not be able to actually paint the Sistine Chapel. Yet someone like da Vinci, I asked this to someone the other day, like if you had, my friend was painting and showing me her oils and her acrylics. It was like, okay, what do you think Da Vinci would have painted if he had access to canvases and paints and things like we do now? Because the average American painter who's just taken a one course who's just garbage compared to Da Vinci has so much more access to the actual paints and canvases and time to actually spend and do these things, but just creates things that are just look like just pebbles compared to the chapels that Leonardo could create. So I'm kind of wondering if you put him in this current day, would he be creating much grander things, or would he also just be kind of sitting back on his laurels? That I also ask myself, I feel there might be more I can do. Might be able to just say, okay, Stephen, let's stop and let's record the rest of the book today. But we still do the kind of economizing of our time and see how we communicate. So this is something that I was just thinking about with the frustration with this, with the ability that people have to not communicate certain things that they have due to certain limitations they exist in their life. And I can see that frustration, especially when it comes to the failure of people to learn things like English, even though we have all these teachers out there, and then they're not able to communicate in adult life, and we see certain issues in society and lack of understanding. But yeah.
I think I sent you that article. It was written by, I want to say, Michael Humer, about would Aristotle be an Aristotelian if he were alive today? And the author concludes no. But it's like, you also have to understand, well, but you have to understand that he paved the way for a lot of people. He made a lot of errors. But the thing is, if he were alive today, he'd be able to build off of the knowledge that's here already. So he could take it how much further, but he'd have microscopes, the different various machines, computers, all this. So he would be able to work a lot farther. But back then he had to just use his senses and write things down. So of course he's going to make errors. He's not going to go as far, but it's not, but considering how little knowledge was developed in the technology he had, yeah, he wasn't capable of doing quantum physics or other things.
Yeah. And that's definitely one thing that I do suggest to you out there. If you do have the ability to communicate, to speak a language, try to get better at it. Try to get more capable at communicating to yourself. You can start just by yourself and just start recording maybe yourself, and then you try to hear. Imagine you're speaking to somebody who's never heard some of the topics that you're talking about, and if you can communicate them to yourself, then you might be better at communicating them to other people. And I think that'll just make for a better world. So I'm not against the English majors. I'm not against these people. My whole idea was, okay, I just think people should know the language. So again, I might have been projecting my own life situation on other people as well, and assuming that they had the same access to information and education than I did, when clearly they don't, which is kind of sad, but yeah.
Yeah. All right, so getting back into it. So again, if faculty and employers complain that students can't write, so in turn, colleges started requiring an introductory class in writing composition. 85% of these are, of course, taught in the English departments. Introductory composition, one form or another, is the most commonly taken class. As of 1992, they found that 85% of students take it. The second most was 70.6% take intro to psychology, and then 40 to 45% take things like intro to history, biology, sociology, etc. Now, intro to composition has increased from the 70s on. In 1973, only 76% took it. In 1992, as we say, it was 85%. As of 1998, it was 97%. So each decade, more and more people are taking it. The number of semesters requiring the class has also increased. In 1973, 41% of schools only required one semester, while the remaining 59% required two. By 1998, 26% required a single semester, 64% required two or more semesters, and 10% required three or more semesters. So again, a higher percentage of people are taking it, but also more colleges are requiring that you have more semesters in it.
Okay.
Now, when this was done about, see, they said they didn't specify the time frame, but they found that in past decades, about 600,000 a year took advanced placement English in high school, which often earns them an exemption from an intro class. So if the college only requires one intro to composition class and you're an AP English student, you don't have to take it at all. If they require two, maybe you'll have to take one. And then if it requires three, you might get out of one, but you'll have to take the other two. Some people think that this is a result of AP students getting out of it, that they're requiring more, but speculation.
Yeah.
So nearly all incoming students have to take this, but since the demand for English degrees is down, this is likely why these classes are being pushed on people and required. Similar story with foreign language instructors, although it's not as bad as English. As of 1999, 75.4 colleges required a foreign language, which is up from 68% in 1995. And in recent years, it seems to have gone up even higher from the 75.4%. So again, go back to think of the handwriting example with doctors at the beginning. You see a similar thing with the English. That's why there's like English 101, English 102, English 103, all this. They explain too that at ASU, that's Arizona State University, where Jason taught, 400 out of the 550 English classes are introductory, but only 10% of economics classes are introductory. So again, think about that. It's like a lot of these English classes are just being forced on people as introductory to composition or other things, whereas economics, you might take an intro to micro, intro to macro, but that's it. You're only going to get in depth if you actually study it as a major. Yeah. So this ensures job placement for English PhDs, even though many, of course, would rather teach at the higher levels. So most English majors would rather teach advanced literature, poetry, things like that. But again, the demand for those is super low, and there's already people there. So it's very tough to get a job in those. And a lot of these English teachers just end up teaching these remedial or introductory classes because there's just not demand at those higher end, more interesting things. And I was talking to my mother about this recently, how if you think about it, the best professors do teach the higher level stuff, because it's like they want to teach grad students, they want to teach law, they want to teach higher level things. These classes are more sort of given to the professors that just recently graduated and are trying to work their way up to something higher, but there may not be a place for them as we're laying out here.
And also when it comes down to it, there's the aspect of there's not too many econ classes in K through 12.
No,
pretty much every grade in K through 12, or maybe not K, every grade from maybe third grade all the way through senior year would have some English things. So a lot of the people who graduate with the English degrees also go into the K through 12 system and teach there. So I think there is that. But then again, why are they not able to actually produce children that are able to actually communicate well when they get to college? Yeah.
So this is essentially another Baptist and bootlegger scenario. We can say that the Baptists are the teachers who actually do want to improve the students' writing, but the bootleggers would be the holdover professors and the administration, because think about it, like they want students to have to take these classes because it creates jobs for them. And then the administration wants this because then they can charge more money for tuition. That's more money in their pockets. So it's, hey, if you want a degree from here, you have to take all these intro to composition classes, pay a few more $1,000s. And it's better for the administrators as well as the faculty teaching them. And again, it's just like there are more jobs related to English than there is actual demand for them. So to be fair, there's no solid evidence that this is how things are being done, although the authors have said that anecdotally they know professors at other colleges who have told them, they've talked at meetings, and that teachers and administrators have actually said all of these things about, like, yeah, we need these classes so students can give us work. Yeah, we'll get more money out of this. So again, a lot of this is a lot of anecdotal information, but it seems to hold up based on the other things that they're explaining here.
Okay.
So the question we just have to ask is, well, are English our English composition classes a means to improve student writing, or B, a form of rent seeking? And then, do English composition classes work? If the answer is no, well, I think our answer is obvious, because again, it's like you're just pushing people through things, making them take them, and they don't do what they're supposed to do. So the next section is, do these classes actually work? Did you have anything to add before we continue?
Yeah, with the languages thing, it's a struggle with communication. I do understand it's rather it's something unique. I don't take it for granted. The ability to communicate, the literacy. I was just checking this up because it said here it says literacy in our world and our world in data.org, which is a great site for all sorts of other things. I've been using this site to kind of track the COVID stuff because it gives you good things like numbers of people tested, and you can do these different graphs and copy things and recovery rates. It was one of the first place I was finding data on recovery rates that wasn't actually listed in other places, which I think was a positive thing to have. But yeah, it says here, while only 12% of the world could read and write in 1820, 12% in 1820. It's not that long ago. It's 200 years, but 200 years is not that long ago. Today, the share has reversed. Only 14% of the world's population in 2016 remained illiterate. I might be one of the ones. 14%, I can't read the word. Over the last 65 years, the global literacy rate increased by 4% every 5 years, from 42% in 1960 to 86% in 2015. It was 42% in 1960. Just think about that. So one thing I would encourage, I know we've kind of been dumping on the English majors and things like that. I would encourage, this is one thing that I have thought of that I think would be a positive situation for the world, is if we could get everyone up to a proficient level at speaking English. That's one language, and it might as well be English because it's used in other things. So if there was a bigger concentration of K through 12, of pre-high school, pre-college, because I'm wondering if somebody can't even learn that basic language and be proficient enough at their basic language that they speak, are they in a mental state to be able to select a major, to make such a decision? Are they in a mental state to be able to actually go out and vote on things? Because that's around the age they're entering college, they're getting around the voting age and things like this. But if somebody is just basic, because illiteracy means you can't read or write at all. If you can just write your name and you can kind of understand some prose and understand sentence structure, grammar, then maybe that's considered literacy. So there's different levels of it. That is also a bell curve on the actual literacy level. So I think the world would be better if we found a way to get all these English people, to get people in your teens, early teens, to the point where you're at least fluent in that one language so you can communicate with people around you, still maintain those other languages. Then now when you get into those high levels, or if you're learning it at home, where you can learn these secondary, tertiary languages. But this whole idea of just getting to college, it's getting to like 18, 19, 20, and you're supposedly literate, but you can't put together just a basic paper explaining your standpoint on a major issue in the world that you're supposed to vote on. It to me, there's something that is not quite right when you approach that kind of situation. And also at the same point, I realize 42% in 1960. So this could be a thing where I'm expecting too much out of this, maybe, because for 99.99999% of the world, we didn't even have, we've existed, we didn't even have language and things like that. So, and I think this literacy thing, one more thing, is also not just in English. This is also counting, like they're counting the people in China who are, of course, speaking Mandarin, writing in Mandarin, or these other languages. And it's not like, that's what, third of the population of the world? Is it a third, or is it just like a billion and something? It's like, no, India is the one that has a billion. Yeah, China's about a third. So most of the people there are literate in Mandarin and the other different dialects of the Chinese language there. So it's not just English, but I think I would be happy to see as 90% plus in the next 100 years be literate in at least one language. Yeah.
One thing that gets me too is like people would always complain about like, oh, this education system is terrible. Look who's president. It's like, well, people are spending more time in school than ever. It's like, it's always, we're spending more money on school than ever. People are spending more time in school than ever. What is it? If people spend another 4+ years, all this will be fixed. I mean, come on. It's like, at least ask these questions here. It's like, you know.
And then they also say, oh, the most educated people vote for these groups. And then they look at certain groups, because most of the people that say this are people who talk about this when they're talking about at least from what my experience, mocking people like Donald Trump being president. So they say, oh, we have the most educated voters voting for us, but we also have the minorities voting for us in predominant, in higher levels of amount. And yet they also complain that those minorities are also the most underserved by the education system.
Yeah.
So are they saying somehow the most underserved, the most uneducated, and also the most educated seem to vote for that. And then that middle, that's what would we say about that middle? So it's
yeah.
kind of thing that brings up. Yeah.
All right, so this next section is, do required composition in foreign language courses work? So there's almost no evidence that 101 composition courses do work. So let's revisit Richard Aron and Giuseppe Rox's, if I don't know if I'm saying it correctly, work from chapter 3. This was the study that showed the scores on the CLA, the Collegiate Learning Assessment, at the beginning of the freshman year and then at the end of sophomore year. Now, again, we can debate the merits of standardized testing. We talked about in previous chapters how the grading is kind of flawed, how student evaluations influence grading, all that. So the whole system's a bit flawed. But the point is, the CLA is designed to measure the impacts of things like Composition 101. How are they at the end of their first year? How are they at the end of the second year? And one of the items on the test is that students have 90 minutes to solve a problem scenario, write out a response to how they would do it. The grade of it is based on complex reasoning, critical thinking, problem solving, and written expression. So Arum and Roxa found no meaningful improvement in the first 2 years of college. The average student who took the test in the fall of 2005 showed only a 7-point improvement in the spring of 2007. So slight improvement, but not much. Modern results from these studies, like this one, they compare favorably to studies in the 80s and 90s. Some of these have actually found that their people are actually worse. Some people come out of these writing composition classes, their writing actually gets even worse. And to be clear, these studies did equalize for factors such as socioeconomic status, what are the study habits, what were the prior grades. Like, they tried to equalize all those things to make sure we're comparing apples to apples. And some students, of course, did show significant improvement, but the average ones did not. So this suggests that on average, these are a waste of time and money. Now, two studies, one was done in 2008, another was done in 2012, showed there hasn't been much work done to see if remedial classes are even doing what they're supposed to. So they did a study to see if there are studies on remedial classes. They couldn't find any. And this also gets tough to measure because some students may benefit from these depending what remedial students. You're already taking students with worse study habits, and you have to get into other factors like, did students do poorly in high school, but then went to college and decided to buckle down? And some of it becomes a little murky. It's hard to measure. And it's not clear that remedial works in terms of longer lasting skills. However, they say it does increase graduation and retention rates. For example, studies done at universities in Ohio and at Baltimore Community College showed that they increased preparedness for other classes as well as the graduation and retention rates, like I say. So this might be good for other reasons, but then this also gets into, do universities just want people to stick around because they'll spend more money? So it's more about pushing them through the curricula, and if they don't make it in the real world, oh, well, we have their money. I sort of saw this at culinary school too, as I mentioned in a previous discussion, where you could conceivably keep failing classes. You could just keep retaking them, but at some point you would say it's not worth the money. Like, you could conceivably take every class twice, but you'd be spending double your tuition money, and it's like, would it really be worth it at the end of the day to do that? If that, to take an extreme example. And how about foreign languages? It's harder to measure because language courses generally don't lead to fluency. Among American adults, fewer than 2.5% claim they can speak a language very well or well as a result of instruction at school. And again, like the study on how courageous would you be, this is a self-reported number. So in reality, it's probably lower. A certain, 2.5% says I speak very well. But again, break that down further. How many do in reality is probably less than that. And students also vary, as you sort of touched on, and how much would they get out of these courses. So for example, someone looking to become a diplomat, yeah, they're going to be inclined to learn languages. Someone who just wants to do economics and that's it, they're going to have less incentive to study French or Spanish. Same thing in other fields. And students may find the second language valuable in general, but again, it's kind of subjective, hard to measure. Like the statistic we keep citing of, oh, college is valuable, how well I met my wife. It's like, people may say, oh, it was fun, I met some good people, but did it lead to practical real world use? Maybe, maybe not. Like, I remember in high school, I wanted to learn Italian. My school doesn't offer it, but it's one of those things that even if I had learned it, how much would I use it today? I mean, I've been working in an Italian restaurant, so it may help with food words and things like that, but is it going to pave the way for a new career? Probably not, unless I went to work in Italy, but even there, that's debatable because a lot of Italians speak English anyway. So, yeah, some of this stuff just gets what's that?
Only in Rome.
Only in Rome, okay.
Rome, I mean, from my experience, in Rome, I didn't really have to learn Italian, but once I went to school in Turin, there's a lot fewer people. It just dropped. It completely crashes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure. Any points to add before we move on?
Yeah, with just going back into the whole selection and how ready people are to do some of these things. It's a question for. I know you went to culinary school. From my experience, I did not know what major I was going to pick. I was going in a partial scholarship to play football, and I just knew they had an art department. I had seen the art department, so I knew there was going to be some courses, and then it was between. I thought I was going to lean towards maybe doing stuff like advertising, but they didn't have an advertising major, so I went with graphic design because they had graphic design and art education. I went with graphic design, and I didn't know what the courses were definitely before I chose the school, choosing it more for the football scholarship and things like that. And this is something that I'm asking for the people out there. How many of you knew the major you wanted to take when you actually applied to college? And then on top of that, once you were actually picking the major, how many of those colleges actually showed you which courses you would need to take to actually get that major and actually get some explanation of it? And I think you'll find very few actually did that. And that's a tough thing because they're signing you up for 4 years,
Yeah.
but they're not telling you what actual content is going to be there.
No.
Some people might be attracted to a certain school because a certain professor, a certain person is a teacher there, is teaching a course, and they enter and they say, oh, well, we don't know. This person has to take all these general studies for 2 years. By the time you get there, that person could die, could have moved on, could have changed his actual course content. So the thing you signed up for is not there anymore. So there's these kind of issues that there's not too many environments that are in this kind of place. If you say somebody needs general studies, needs 2 years of general studies before they can pick their major, why should they even be in college for those 2 years? Couldn't they be doing something else more productive or saving money and thinking about what they're doing? And then what does that say about the K through 12 again? How prepared are people after that K through 12 process? What is that doing that is bringing people out who make these major mistakes apparently in what they're going to do for their life?
And like I say, what always kills me too is I hear things like, the same people will say to me, "Oh, college is worthwhile." Then I'll be like, "How much of it did you use?" They're like, "Well, I learned on the job." That's what a lot of people do. But then it's like, okay, but how much of this stuff that you learned in school did you actually apply? Oh, very little, almost none. Well, then how was it valuable? Like it doesn't follow. It's like, it's like you have to make the case to me. Like with culinary school, you can make the argument like, and the thing is too, chefs will even criticize this because culinary school, you can learn the fundamentals like, okay, here's how to make these sauces, here's knife cuts, all that. But there's certain things you can only learn in the real world. Like, what do you do if the walk-in breaks down? What do you do if you're out of something? What if you run out of something in the middle of service and you have to like get it together on the fly? What do you do if someone calls out, you have to work a station? Like there's certain things you can only learn in the real world, and like it's very hard to recreate that environment in an artificial setting.
Yeah. And I think that's definitely one thing that we'll be going through some major changes in this post-pandemic world is that general studies kind of thing. That's something that can definitely be done remotely. That's in general, most of those courses can be done remotely. They can be done by a mix of people. You don't really benefit so much for the actual value that's actually in those courses. You don't really benefit so much by it being taught by one specific person in a specific way. You can literally be taught the content by, like you're talking about all these English majors and things like that. You can literally be taught by a different person every class, every course, every day you go to, and it's still getting the same information. Yes, there might be something where you're saying you have some closer relationships and some rapport with certain teachers and things like that that you would not have. But if it's the content, if it's the information, that can be learned without the thing, and you can still figure out ways where you say, okay, this one teacher moves around with this group of people until they're full with it, and whether it's remote learning, whether it's on location, you meet up in certain places. There's ways to do this that are, I think, going to be going to take more advantage of the current abilities that we have in technology. Yeah.
Sure. Okay. So next section, other general ed requirements. I think by now you see a general pattern here. Someone makes the case that students need some skill or knowledge. Someone proposes a solution. I always laugh that old thing in politics. We need to do something. This is something. Let's do this. And again, this could be well intentioned. Like people could sincerely want students to become better writers or all that. But you've also created a system in which professors can now lobby for more power, prestige, money, etc. And professors seek rent seeking through the education system. And if it doesn't work, what happens? Oh, we just need more classes. We need more funding, the usual government thing. Yeah. And the rent-seeking hypothesis, again, it's open to testing. I mean, the authors are doing it here, and anyone else is free to challenge it. But you would have to measure what classes are required, how they're funded, if students want them, if they do what they're supposed to, all that. And then on top of it, they've also, over the last 30 years ago or so, we've had some, they're called first-year experience classes, which are meant to introduce students to university life. Now, these haven't been studied as in-depth as some of the other classes, but they tend to be taught by faculty across multiple disciplines. They usually include things like general introductory classes to art, history, cultural studies, etc. But then again, this gets into what we keep talking about: are these relevant to students, and would they actually learn them? And no, they just seem to be required regardless of relevancy. And the colleges just measure their success by how much enrollment and staff hired they get. So they just say, oh, look, we have a big department, we're training all these people. But they don't actually explore, are these classes desired? Do they have a real impact? And is it worth it to the students? And it goes back to the calligraphy example of its success and funding just depends on enrollment, which isn't natural, but is rather forced. So they're basically forcing people to take it and then saying, oh, look at all this enrollment, it's a successful course, which, is really not fair. And this next section, we get into some the ethics of general education requirements. Again, well, what are some of the justifications? Like, the common one is we need well-rounded students. We don't want students who just have a narrow specialization. But as we have seen, more and more students have to take more semesters of writing composition than 1973, and many of these first-year education classes weren't even available then. So even if we accept the well-rounded claim, it doesn't explain why there are so many more classes that never get used in the real world and aren't desired, and why there's even more of the same classes. Like, why are there 3 semesters of writing composition that don't even have a positive impact? And if we accept the rent-seeking claim, I mean, as far as we can tell, it holds up here. Like, it's graduates should know X, therefore students should be required to take at least one course in X. Okay, it sounds superficially plausible, but then that gets into, does number 2 actually achieve number 1? And as far as we can tell, no. So for example, the example they would bring up is, okay, there's an outbreak of a certain disease. I know I might get my head bitten off by some anti-vaxxers here, but then the government mandates a vaccine. We can get into a debate about vaccines, whether they're good or not, or they should be mandatory, but at least there's some sort of testing. Okay, if there's an outbreak of this, we're going to do this as a reaction. This has a measurable effect. Okay, at least we can put that to the test. But with this, it's just, no, everyone has to take these courses. Do they have a positive impact? Well, we didn't test it, or no, they don't. Okay, well, then why is everyone taking it? I mean, and yeah. Did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, because if you can actually test and find out what the actual effect is there, because I'm not saying, I'm sure there's no effect, there's no positive of this. Most things will continue to exist if there is even some secondary effect. Once it becomes so negative, it normally burns out, or people notice enough to end the system. So the fact that they continue shows there is some perceived benefit. Once you can identify what that benefit is, then I can imagine they being situations where people can a couple of English majors can come together and say, okay, we just offer this course. This is the result that you get if you go to this university, or you can pay us half the amount that it's going to cost you for these semesters, for each of these credits at that university, and we'll teach it to you in 3 months, and then you'll be able to go and show whoever is gaining that benefit. Maybe from that point, there's another school that has decided, let's divorce ourselves. We have an engineering department at this one company that we run. We partner together with a few other companies, and we create our own little curriculum. And then each of our employees actually gets to study different things and present different ideas and thoughts that they've had. And that's also a way for our employees to go back and learn what's new in the market, what's new happening in the field. And then now students, instead of going to a university for it, they can come to this small environment apprenticeship and come. And if there are positives from the English thing, they'd already had the separate English thing. And we're going to go away from this whole. We've got to the point where accreditation. Accreditation is different. Accreditation is okay because you can get
credentialization, maybe you're trying to say.
Credentialization, yeah, where people are just focusing on, you just have to have a college degree. But people don't even look at the details. They don't look at what you study. It's like, you have a degree and that's it. There's going to be different ways to actually show that. Like I just recently saw there was like a sex work university, and apparently that's just started recently. They don't give degrees or anything, but there's things to be learned. Like I'm thinking, okay, I don't see the purpose with it. I think in general, you're not even if you're just a female, you can probably go online, put a webcam on, and find some people to pay you some money if you, depending on your attractiveness and your level of
Yeah.
comfort of doing certain things. I think if you do that, but now there is a reason to have a sex university because with the pandemic coming in, apparently there was an explosion in like OnlyFans and people going online like webcam type of things, going on Twitch and all these things. So these people saw, oh, there's actual a market here. Let's start a university, and now people are paying them to learn certain basic things about it. And it's a similar thing. I don't want to project that people understand how to record this. Like we're recording this over Skype. Technically, anyone can just call a friend who's read a book, say we're going to go back and forth and talk about it, and then they can download free programs to do the post production and then post it on YouTube for free. You can do all that for free, but some people will require a course to do that. So, and we can see what the benefit is. So you don't have to have a 4-year degree in graphic design like I did to be able to do what I'm doing here. So if
Right.
somebody else can figure out how to teach that, they can offer that without the 4-year degree. And all these other things we're talking about, like for example in English, there's ways to find out what is the benefit of being able to do you said, what was it, the writing? It wasn't just English, it was English what? Composition?
English intro to composition.
Yeah. So there might be benefits from intro to comp that somebody might be able to say, we can package that outside of this university environment where you're paying for that along other things. So you'll be able to actually get this benefit in a more economical way. So I think that's some of the things that are coming.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, to sort of add on to that vaccine analogy too, the authors make the analogy like if let's say there's an outbreak of a disease and the government advocates psychic healing, and then it's, well, we're all just supposed to do this, why? Well, we think it'll get results. Has this been tested? No, but just have faith that it'll get results. It's a
Yeah.
similar sort of thing here with this general education, but even the education system as a whole, it's beneficial. Why? Well, it just is. I benefited a lot. How did you benefit? Well, I had a good time. It's like, it's very subjective, sort of hard to measure stuff, and it's like a person conceivably could get psychic healing and their body could beat the disease. But is that because of the psychic healing or because of other factors? Same thing here. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's some of the things you're wondering, what is this actually selecting for? With like some PhDs, you look at certain topics of the PhDs and you're like, did we really need to know that? But is it about the actual content of it, or is it about the form? Being able to stop and focus and systematically break something down and be able to communicate it and prove it to somebody who's never actually dealt with it. So it could be anything, as long as you have the ability to PhDize it
Yeah.
to get to the. But we'll talk about that, I'm sure, in the next chapter. We're talking about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then the other argument here is they make the distribution for discovery's sake argument, like, oh, students should be required to take all sorts of classes. They may be exposed to something they weren't in high school. So that might spark an interest. And to be fair, like, superficially, there is some merit to this. Like, I didn't take any economics courses in high school. I couldn't take Italian or German in high school, which I had more interest in. So I am sort of sympathetic to that argument. But then it's also like, okay, it wouldn't justify taking a few semesters of a language to see if you like it, and then you find out you don't, and it's like, well, all that time, money, opportunity cost. So it raises the question of, does this actually expand students' breadth of knowledge and exposure to new ideas? And we'd have to find evidence showing that gen eds help students discover new fields and choose their majors. Again, there don't seem to really be any studies on this. And is there a better or cheaper way to do this? One idea that the author suggests is maybe do like 1 hour introductions to multiple courses. I remember when I first went to middle school, we did a similar thing. Like, okay, you sit in a Spanish class for an hour, they address us, and then the French class and all this. So you have an idea of what you're foreshadowing, maybe something like this, where see if it sparks an interest, but there's a bit more of a trial and error thing rather than, oh, pick something that sounds good. You commit to a full semester, then you either drop the class and take something else, or it costs, the way it's set up now, it takes a lot more time and money, and you find out you may not like it. So that's
Yeah.
a concern. And Again, the burden of proof is on the universities. Like obviously we can experiment to a point, but I mean, you're taking students' time and money and opportunity costs, and that definitely bears worth scrutiny. And general ed courses in general have higher monetary and opportunity costs. Again, if they pick a specific major, okay, the student chose that. So if they get into the real world and decide they don't want to use it, fine, but they did pick it of their own volition. Versus if they take all these filler courses and they say, yeah, I don't remember any of it, well, what was really the point of that? And universities, the authors would argue, and I would too, they have an ethical obligation not to waste time and money. That's why it's like you buy anything else. Like my brother went and bought his car recently. They go through all the details with it. Here's the leasing plan. Here's the mileage, all this. So you really know what you're getting into. It's not, oh yeah, this looks good, pick it out, and then they dump a bunch of surprises on you. You know, and and let's see here, and then one of the authors, the hypothetical examples the author set up was like, imagine if universities required a crystal healing course in order to graduate. It's like, well, you can see how absurd that would be. It's like, this has no basis in reality. I'm never going to use this. And then I had to pay money and spend time. But in reality, a lot of these other courses do essentially fill that same role. It's, you don't want to take them. They don't really have much real world value. And then it's time you could have spent studying other more relevant things or gaining work experience. And let's see here.
And it's not just the inherent value of the thing. It's also what are you going to do?
Yeah.
Because it's quite possible, like something like physics, you can say that's practically important. But if somebody knows they're going to just be working on as a butcher, that getting a PhD in theoretical physics might not be worthwhile. So we're not simply talking about saying, oh, English is automatically worthless compared to a STEM field. That's not what we mean. We just say whatever you're doing to be productive as an adult and continue to make a living and just exist, is college the best way for you to actually get that? Is it in a situation where you're picking and choosing the right sort of things, right environment, right information? Yeah.
And so it'll be explained more in chapter 9, but apparently a lot of students also cheat in these classes because they don't want to be there and they're just taking it to get a grade. So they're doing what they have to get through that class, and that's it. Whereas if it's something they genuinely find interesting, they're going to work harder and actually study the material. Whereas with this, it's just, okay, I'll tell the teacher what they want to hear, maybe copy other students, get the grade, and just get out. But it's like, is that really why you're there? And if we want to take a really cynical, sorry, you had something to say?
No.
So, and if we take a really cynical view of this, I mean, it's just clearly rent seeking and these professors are the bootleggers. I mean, again, if there's evidence that this is done for good intentions, we're willing to see it. But based on what the authors found and what I've seen, not really a lot of proof of it. And also, there are two other hidden costs to academic rent seeking as well. So first, the requirements will reduce the incentive to teach the class as well. So, for example, the analogy the authors used would be if government required that everyone eat breakfast at a fast food restaurant like Burger King, well, Burger King is going to slack off over time because they know they're guaranteed business no matter what. It's a similar thing here with Gen Ed's classes where they assign lower level professors who don't really want to teach it and just make them teach it instead of offering the class and seeing what the demand is. So there will be professors who don't want to be there. They're more likely to half-ass a lot of things, all that. And so both the students and the professors, they're not going to try as hard, versus if you have a professor who's really passionate, you have students who are passionate, that's going to lead to better learning and longer lasting results. And the other thing too is that rent seeking diverts faculty away from scholarly activities and into academic politics. There's a lot of fighting when new courses are added and old ones are removed. So they usually fight over the prerequisites, what's required for credits, cross listings. They debate the enrollment potential, the details of the course content, what the workloads for each classes are, et cetera, et cetera. And even small, and the thing is too, it's very bureaucratic. They said in colleges, small changes can take months to complete, major changes can take years. And we'll probably get more into this on the solution, but in the solution section, but you could also argue that a smaller, more decentralized structure, it would allow some of these changes a little more fluidly, where you have this massive multi-thousand-dollar faculty, multi-thousand student and all these faculty. It's a lot harder to make these changes because you have to disrupt so much. And the authors admit that some of these last few points, they haven't formally done studies on, but they've experienced it in their own experience as well as gotten confirmation from colleagues they know who have said they've witnessed similar things. Jason was once part of a committee that tried to create a new major at the request of students, but another department killed it. And they openly said, no, if we have this new study, it's going to take enrollment away from our department. They just said that flat out. So obviously selfish motives here. And Phil has seen cases where professors push to have their courses required in irrelevant majors, and then professors will lobby to protect their turf if the department is underperforming or unwanted. So they'll have everyone take the writing composition, even if it's not relevant. They have, you see with a lot of these studies courses, everyone will have to take Introduction to Feminism, even though it's like, well, I'm going in economics. Why do I need this anyway? And then if you try to take it away, you're going to deal with a lot of a backlash from those teachers and all this fighting. So it's tough. There's a lot of politics in the faculty of education as well. And just a point to sort of finish up here, it's not clear that gen ed requirements do what they're supposed to or they're worth the time and money. Now, they've said some schools do it well, like the University of Chicago, but that's already a very tough school, so their standards are going to be a lot higher. Overall, they just seem to be a waste of time, money, energy. So it's just about creating employment for professors who have more PhDs than we need. All right, so that's the end of that.
I think one thing to keep in mind when you're thinking about these four-year institutions and things like that, when you're in a course, when you're trying to judge the classes, think about this. Would you be able to have a four-year university? Let's say you're at a two-year institution or a four-year institution. If there is a course they're offering, would you be able to have a full-time institution that focuses only on that topic? If you can't really see that happening, then there's a good chance that course doesn't have to be part of a four-year university, a university experience or a two-year university experience, let alone the PhD type of things. Like the same way I'm saying you can have a school of economics. If you can have a school of sex work online and things like that, a sex work university, that's something that, would you think that would be a general studies? Like, can you make an argumentation that because you can have a school that focuses just on general studies, on sex work, and it's not a four-year institution. I didn't actually click the actual details to see what it was, but I just saw an article about it. But would you consider that to be one of the general studies? Why shouldn't that be a general studies course? Why shouldn't we take intro to webcamming, to being a cam girl, like 101? Should that be something that's a regular thing, just like English 101? Because I do imagine they could be entirely just, this school just teaches English. I was like Chicago School of Economics. That's what they teach. Like CIA, the Culinary Institute of America, teaches culinary food, cooking, and things like that. The schools I went to, the Institute of European Design, that school just teaches different design things. So I think that's kind of what we're looking at in the future, where there's going to be more specialization in that. And then people will be encouraged to pick courses that they're selecting, let's pick this for this. The payment system will be able to there. When I did go to the university that I did for my postgraduate Institute of European Design, that one I had an idea of the entire course work that I was going to do before I signed up for the course. It's just the current system, it is quite problematic, and I think for most people, they weren't quite sure of the general education courses they took. And I don't know how many people out there, as we mentioned before, can practically say that there is something they're using in their day-to-day life, productive day-to-day life, that could only have been learned by taking one of those general studies courses that they were made to take in order to get their actual major and actual other thing that they're doing in their life.
Well, and also too, the thing about well-rounded people, like I do agree with that in principle. Like Silas knows by now, I'm not into sports because I grew up surrounded by people who talked about sports nonstop. So like it drove me nuts. And then, but what's funny is that some of my friends like you and as well as Rose, Abraham, other people, they're into sports, but they can talk about a number of other things. And that's why I'm friendly with them, because we can talk on a variety of subjects. So I do like the idea of well-rounded people, but the question is, do the general studies courses actually do this? Especially, again, we'll get into the future chapter on cheating. If students are just fudging it for the sake of getting the grade and they don't remember any of it, are you really creating well-rounded people anyway, or are you just taking their time and money and giving virtually nothing back? That's like I agree in principle. Yeah, I want more well-rounded people, but is the system as it works actually achieving that? I don't see the evidence that it is.
I just need to think off my head. If you on average, the freshman year, or 3 semesters, you're taking general studies course where you actually get into your major, which is about a year and a half. If on average that cost is $2,000 maybe on average,
Yeah.
what if that person just took those $2,000 and traveled around the country a bit and got little side jobs here and there, learning, meeting, seeing different parts of the country, meeting people, interacting with people of different ages, and just becoming part of the nation and understanding more about themselves? Wouldn't that make them more well-rounded than spending those 1.5 years in English 101, Algebra 101, uh, webcam girling 101? I think they might be a way to get something where,
Yeah.
and then by that time, once that person comes back, maybe they've seen more practical examples of how to actually make a living, how to live in different places, and now they'll get a better idea and say, okay, now I'm going to be in a better position to actually pick a major and pick a specialization and get into that. I don't know. And maybe even you can include the teachers in this. You can have the teachers who would be teaching those general studies courses be chaperones of sorts, and then they just do travel things around the country. You can even keep the universities, keep the dorms.
Yeah.
Just in every university, instead of just saying these kids are going to be prisoner to our universities, you have sister universities in different regions that work together, and you have one of your dormitories that has reduced cost for those kids to come around and move around over that 1.5 years to actually meet different places and see different things. And they could be different ways where maybe you have a school like that where people come and then for one semester they're at the Culinary Institute of America, has some partnership, and then they're working in the cafeteria. So they're not directly learning the high level stuff, but they're interacting with people who are professionals who are learning that high level stuff while cooking just very basic stuff and just giving people basic food. During the day, they travel around New York City and they visit restaurants and things. So there's other ways to do it. This whole idea, I don't understand why we're still stuck on that whole thing that after K through 12, people have to enter university immediately and start on that and pick what they're going to do for the rest of their life. It seems disingenuous, and I'm not quite sure why people are stuck in that mentality.
And that sort of, I get, this is my paranoid conspiracy side, but this gets into like, do you just want these as indoctrination mills? Because it's like, what? Because it's like, why do you feel people have to, like, again, I keep saying over and over, I'm not saying nobody should go to school for anything. I think doctors should go to school. I think academics should go to school. But if you're just going to pick some random thing, you'll be like, well, gender studies sounds interesting. What are you going to do with that? I don't know. I'll figure it out. I don't see a single case for how or why that's beneficial. And people will be like, it was a fun time. And I'm like, okay, but that's a lot of time and money to just have a fun time. Like, I think some of the Praxis guys, like I think Isaac Morehouse wrote, like, you and some friends could get together, rent out a house near a college, go to parties, even host parties there, go to events and just work. And it's like, you'd probably benefit your future a lot more than that, than just fool around in school and not remember anything you've learned and go massively into debt.
Yeah. No, going back to what we mentioned at the start, I know the dealers who in this state are the teachers, as you said, they're rent seeking, rent seeking, and most of them are just trying to make a living and put food on the table and support their lifestyle and their kids and their wives and things like that. Then they rationalize that they're also teaching kids. So of course they would want students in as fast as possible. But this other idea that I thought of, if you give them other options, I think a lot of them would still do that. But when it comes down to the government and the state, I do understand they're dealers. Like the dealers know what drugs do. The dealers are trying to get addicts and users. What I was wondering was, why are the users, us, the general public, why are we still in that mentality that that's the way things should be? As mentioned, we haven't mentioned in this part of the conversation, but we talked about it before. I forget who said it, who was talking about how the industry schooling, this compulsory schooling thing, is the experiment. It's not the inverse where the homeschooling, the remote schooling, that kind of situation is the test, is the brand new thing. It's like, no, the whole people going to one location and sitting there for extended amounts of years, that is the experiment. So is that experiment working? Is this general education part of the experiment something we should restart and continue and go forward and other countries should pick up on? Not quite sure. I think there's still a question mark out there, a question mark for those of you who are listening.
Yeah. And as I keep saying, I mean, don't treat the teachers as a sacred class. They're as self-interested as anyone else. It's like, if, as we've gone through here, and I'm sure Brian Kaplan, other people have written stuff about this as well. If we know that these things don't do what they're supposed to, they keep pushing for them anyway. what other purpose does it serve? It's like at some point you have to deliver results. Like I thought about this in my own head. Like if I hire an exterminator company for a restaurant, we keep seeing pests, you just fire the company because they're not doing what they're supposed to. It's like you don't keep, if they keep telling me, oh, well, it's beneficial, well, this will help you down the road. It's like, no, you have to give me evidence for why that's the case. I can't just take that on faith.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's it?
Yep, that's it. That's all I have for this chapter.
Okay. So that's been it for chapter 7, which was the general education hustle, on our conversation on the cracks in the ivory tower, the moral mess of higher education by Jason Brennan and Phillip Magness. As I mentioned before, if you haven't listened to the one on the, what was it, the 7 big economic insights, the normative business ethics questions and descriptive business ethics questions, I suggest you check that one out before continuing with the rest of the series. But if you're listening to this, there's at least 6 other parts up that you can listen to that, or check out other conversation series, 1619 Project, Critical Theory one, You Are What You Consume. Am I forgetting anything else? I've had some other conversations which are more like
1619, You Are What You Consume, Cynical Theories. Oh, and there was the ones about the restaurants in the city and what the future.
Yeah, that was part
we
of
did like 1 or 2 videos on that. Yeah.
I think that one is folded into the You Are What You Consume because it's still like the food industry and things like that. But yeah, so there's that. And then we also have, depending on when you listen to this, because you're not going to, it's not like we're going to take it down after I've posted it. The next one we're getting into is Human Action, Reading Human Action by Ludwig von Mises. Super excited about that one.
Yep.
And yeah, so thank you, Stephen. Thank you out there for listening. That's it for me.
Sure. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you for listening.